everyone, welcome back. I am Dr. Alexandra Mayer, and this channel is the perfect channel for you if you are looking for information on women's health, hormones, and aesthetics. Last week we started our series on estrogen metabolism. So basically, what does that mean? It means the way that we package up estrogen after our body has used it and get it out so that we don't have things like estrogen dominance. So we kind of talked about some of the symptoms of estrogen dominance: heavy clotty periods, fibroids, increases in estrogen dominant cancers, weight gain, things like that. And we talked about the first phase of estrogen metabolism. So in today's video, we're talking about the second phase, and we're going to go through the way that we get rid of the middle byproducts that are created from the first phase and how we neutralize them to get them out of the body. So let's do a quick review on the first phase. So with the first phase, you'll remember that there's kind of three pathways we can go down, right? There's the good pathway, the 2-OH pathway, the bad pathway, the 4-OH pathway, and the 16-OH pathway, which can be both good or bad depending. More or less, right? The key of this is that the 2-OH pathway doesn't cause as much proliferation or growth, right? So we don't want abnormal growth of tissues. And the 4-OH pathway causes more proliferation, more growth, and more symptoms. You'll remember, and you can see on our little diagram here, you'll remember that in the 4-OH pathway, right, when you go down the 4-OH pathway, you end up with these quinones. And then the quinones need to be taken and either neutralized or to go back to go down the 2-OH pathway and out through excretion. With the quinones, what will happen if they're not neutralized is they're going to create these DNA adducts, these DNA purinating adducts that are going to affect your DNA and can cause things like changes and cancers and things like that. So we're going through two things today. First of all, we're going through, if you go down the 4-OH pathway, so the quote-unquote bad pathway, how can we get those quinones that we created still out of the body? There's still other mechanisms that your body can use to get rid of them. So we're going to go through those. So the second thing we're going to go over is phase 2 detox down the 2-OH pathway, or the quote-unquote good pathway, right? You still end up with an intermediate that does more damage to the body than estrogen would, and we still want to package it up and get rid of it. So we're going to go through that. That's through an enzyme called COMT. So going back to the 4-OH pathway, if you're going down this pathway, which is the bad pathway, right, you end up with a quinone in the middle and you want to get rid of it. How does our body do that? So it gets rid of it using an enzyme mainly called GST, which is glutathione sulfur transferase. And basically what that does is it neutralizes it, so it doesn't create the DNA purinating adduct, and then it gets rid of it from the body. So what are ways that we can kind of encourage proper GST production and get rid of those quinones? There's a few different things that have been shown to help with this. So NAC, N-acetylcysteine, is the first thing we're going to talk about. N-acetylcysteine has been shown to decrease quinone formation and to help the quinones to kind of redirect them to go back down a better pathway so that they can be excreted from the body. The other thing NAC does is NAC actually helps to raise glutathione, right? So glutathione sulfur transferase, you want glutathione to do that. So NAC is a really great treatment strategy for patients. So the question becomes, well, why wouldn't you just use glutathione, right? I'll just take glutathione. Well, glutathione is actually a really complicated pathway, and it requires the ability to recycle your antioxidants. So glutathione recycles your antioxidants, and then your antioxidants recycle your glutathione. So it's a recycling pathway. And it requires a ton of cofactors. We're going to talk a lot about cofactors today. So basically, if you have a pathway, right, that requires certain nutrients, and you don't have those nutrients, those pathways don't work, right? You can have all you want of glutathione. If you don't have the cofactors necessary to recycle it, you won't utilize it very well. So glutathione is not well taken on its own, honestly, because it needs things like selenium, it needs vitamin E, it needs magnesium. Magnesium is going to be a big one we're talking about today. It needs your B6, B12, folate. It needs all of these things to be utilized. So NAC does raise glutathione production, your own natural glutathione production, and can be a really great kind of strategy. The other thing that is a food-based strategy is awesome is broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts are the highest kind of sprout in sulforaphane. Mustard seed sprouts also have it, but broccoli sprouts are the highest. And they can be a really great option for on salads, things like that, to help, again, raise that GST. So if you're going down the bad pathway, right, you can still neutralize those quinones and get them out before they cause any DNA damage. So now we're gonna dive right into phase 2 detox. You'll remember last week that I said that when we're treating estrogen dominance, right, and we're thinking about this, you almost never start with phase 1 because you don't wanna unplug the pipe early if the pipe is still plugged later. It's just not going to work, right? So you usually would want with patients to start with like a phase 3 or phase 2 or a mixture of those before even starting with phase 1. So with phase 2 detox, what we're looking at is if you go down the 2-OH pathway, right, and you end up with that intermediate metabolite, how do we package it up and get it out? So this uses the active methylation. The active methylation is basically just adding a methyl group on, okay? And what we do is we add a methyl group through an enzyme called COMT, or catechol O-methyl transferase. O-methyl, right? Methylation transferase. And what that's doing is it's basically taking your intermediate metabolite and it's making it water soluble so that it can go out in your GI tract. That's what we want. We want to package it up really nice so that it goes out in your GI tract, it doesn't get reabsorbed. When we think about COMT, so COMT is genetic, right? So some people can have slower COMTs or faster COMTs depending on their genetics, which basically means that they get rid of their catechols and their estrogens faster or slower, right? If you're slower, you're going to be more likely to reabsorb it, and it just doesn't go out quite as quickly, so you end up with more symptoms. With COMT, there's a few things to think about. So first of all, there are two kind of cofactors that COMT requires to be able to be used. One is magnesium. So that's really, 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 really important. Magnesium was important for glutathione, which you'll remember. It's important for COMT, and it also can be important in helping patients to have like normal GI function in some cases. So magnesium is really important. The other one is SAMe. And SAMe is a methyl donor that's made in the body, and this is where we think about methylation and MTHFR, which is another genetic mutation. This is where that comes in, is in your ability to create SAMe. So those are two things that COMT requires. If we're looking at other things that COMT requires, activated B vitamins are really, really important. So activated B vitamins, again, in patients who have methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiencies or changes in their MTHFR gene, they're not going to activate their B vitamins very well. So they're not going to be able to utilize their COMT quite as well because they don't have the methyl groups to be able to actually methylate and get the estrogen out. So there are a few factors that slow COMT down, okay? So you can have it slow based on genetics, and then we can slow it down even more because lucky us, right? So the first thing is if you're estrogen dominance actually slows down COMT. It's a little bit of this like hamster wheel that we're on, right? And so we got to stop the hamster wheel. So we know that in estrogen dominant women, normally COMT is a little bit slower, and that's something we may want to work on or give cofactors for, something like that, so that we can speed that process along and help their symptoms. Other things that slow down COMT are things like gut infections. So GI is something we're going to be talking about next week in phase 3 detox, but GI plays a huge role in estrogen metabolism. And we're going to be talking about gut infections. In a couple weeks, we are going to have on Dr. Michelle Retz, who is an expert in GI infection. She's awesome. And we can talk about those kind of things because those will definitely slow down COMT as well. So stay tuned for that. And then environmental exposures. So environmental exposures, we talk a lot about this, right? So PCAs, PCBs, phthalates, all are going to decrease your COMT enzyme and make it slower. So more symptoms of estrogen dominance again. So tidying up and your plastic usage, so not heating things up in plastic, not drinking out of plastic water bottles, tidying up your skincare, right? We all know I'm a big skincare junkie. Tidying up your skincare so that it doesn't have those things in it is really, really important. You're always going to get some environmental exposure. Someone that's very popular was talking about phthalate exposure, and she was saying, well, you get phthalate exposure from your environment, so why do we care if it's in skincare? Well, yes, I mean, yes, you do get phthalate exposure, but that doesn't mean that you want to rub it all over your skin. So tidying up those things are really, really important if we're thinking about estrogen metabolism and making sure that we are able to excrete our estrogen. So quick recap, right? We talked about going down, which pathway are we going down? Are we going down the good pathway, or are we talking going down the bad pathway? If we're going down the bad pathway, then we rely on glutathione sulfur-transferase to get that out. We rely on it to neutralize that quinone and move it right out of the body before it creates any damage, right? So we talked about mechanisms for that. And then if you're going down the good pathway, we still need to get rid of that metabolite. That's not enough. So we want that metabolite to be packaged up, right? Which is the act of making it water soluble, basically. So it can go out in your GI tract. And we talked about COMT as being a huge contributor and like the main enzyme that we think about for that. So next week, we're going to be diving into phase 3 detox. When we dive into phase 3 detox, we're talking about GI tract, right? Because we packaged it up and now it's in the GI. If you have gut infections, if things are off in your GI, if it sits there too long, you run the risk of it getting reabsorbed again. So spoiler alert, that's next week. If you like the content that we're putting out, please go ahead and like the video for us, share it with a friend, drop us a comment. It really helps us a lot to get our channel out there because we want to help as many people as possible. If you have questions, put them in the comments below, and we will see you next week for phase 3 detox.